Today I'm here talking to Dr. Shavana Fineberg about how to talk to your partner about sex. And that's something that was sent to me in a private message as a question to put on these counseling tips. But since I don't have the background and expertise in that subject, I've enlisted the help of my friend Shavana. So Shavana, how did you get interested in doing this kind of work with couples?
Well, I started out as a general therapist, seeing individuals and couples, and the issue of sexuality would certainly come up, both with individuals and couples. And after doing therapy for 40 years, 5 years ago I took a sabbatical and took some time off to really look at where my enthusiasm still was. And I realized that I really love working with couples, general couples therapy, and that I really love the area of sexuality. I had studied Western sex therapy in my clinical training. I brought myself up to date fairly recently in the new advances in Western sex therapy, and I studied for 14 years in a school of Tantra, which is a westernized Eastern perspective on sexuality. And I believe that sex is a really vital, vibrant part of life. For both individuals and couples, and I really want to assist people in getting the most out of their physical intimacy, and I combine it with emotional intimacy. So I want to support people in enjoying their sexual lives.
All right. So how do you talk to your partner about sexual desires? How would you advise? Let's say if you've got a woman my age showing up and maybe she's in a newer relationship and she's like, you know, things aren't quite working the way I exactly like. How do I bring this up?
And that's really common, because there's this, just as a little background, there's this idea in our culture that we are somehow automatically, without any training at all, supposed to be the perfect lover for this person if we're heterosexual with a body completely different from ours, and whose responses, if we have had lovers in the past, whose responses may be quite different from anybody we've been with in the past. So since there's this idea that we should automatically be the perfect lover, and that is really stronger for men, you know, the performance implications, how they should be the greatest performers, I really feel for men because it's much stronger for them. Because there's this implication that we should already know, then to even ask questions would be admitting that we don't know.
Right.
And so it can be very embarrassing. And then particularly for women, even if we have the perfect lover who says, darling, I'll do anything you want, what would you like me to do? We've been so shamed about exploring our own bodies, and the information out there about the female sexual response in particular is so inadequate and outdated that we don't even know what to say. So the first context I want to give, and then I'll answer more directly, you know, is that there really is absolutely no reason that we should know how to be a great lover for our partner. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that we should. It's not a natural thing necessarily. You know, certain aspect of sex, you know, and of intercourse is natural, but cultivating our partner's pleasure is not necessarily natural. It's procreation that's natural. So one of the things to talk about sexuality with your lover is preferably don't bring it up for the first time while you're having a sexual experience. People just feel, we all feel too vulnerable in that moment. The best time to bring it up would be at a completely separate time when you're feeling comfortable with each other, when you have some spacious time, so it's not going to be a rushed conversation, when you have privacy. That would be the context. And then to start with, you know, admitting or acknowledging that this is difficult for me to bring up. You know, it's hard for me to talk about the arena of sexuality, which is what I want to talk about. You know, I have embarrassment about it. I have some lack of knowledge about it. And yet I'd like to talk about it because I would like us to really enjoy that arena together. I would like to learn how to maximize the pleasure that you have, and I would love your help, asking for help. I would love your help in learning what really maximizes my pleasure and also makes us feel really emotionally close, because my approach really combines physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. So you're asking for their help, and it's in service of the relationship. If it's a marriage relationship, you can say, I would like us, for the rest of our lives to really be enjoying each other, sexually. So I'd like to talk a little bit about and learn a little bit together about how we can improve that. Is that something that you're open to? Kind of ask. It's good not to have too long a monologue without allowing the other person to say something, so it's a little bit more of a dialogue. So that's how I would introduce it and bring it up. And maybe even saying, I realize that you don't have a body like mine. If it's a woman saying it, you don't have breasts. You don't have a vagina. I don't have a penis. I don't know exactly what to do with it. So to acknowledge in whatever way is comfortable that there's no reason that anybody should know. And also there's no training in this culture. So wanting to discover together what really works for us. So that's how I would introduce it.
That makes a lot of sense. So in that way, it doesn't really matter then if you're in your 50s, you still may not know, because your partners are all different too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, those of us 50 and above are less likely to know because, sexuality was more taboo and more hidden when we were young, so there was less conversation, free conversation about it. So in some ways, we're almost at a disadvantage in relation to younger people in terms of our knowledge. And then the other piece, which I alluded to, is the more that I learn and read, particularly about the female sexual response, because this is my field, so I'm always reading and learning, the more I'm realizing that the information in the public about what really works for a woman and what really brings a woman to the arousal that she's capable of, the information is not out there. So there's really no reason that men or women should know unless they just lucked into it.
Do you have a generic formula for what brings women to arousal compared to what brings men to arousal, by and large? Or
by and large, women take way more time, literally way more time, like 45 minutes of sexual play to get to an arousal level that might be equivalent to an arousal level that a man can get to in 5 minutes. And part of that, there's this phrase that men work from the inside out. I'll explain it in a minute. Men work from the inside out and women work from the outside in, and which is why it takes more time for women, one of the reasons. And what I mean by that is, with a man, most men are fine, maybe with a little kissing or a little stroking, if you go fairly directly to stimulating their penis. They're happy with that. It feels good, it feels great, Most women, we start way out here before you get to more the genital areas. Some hand holding, some smooching, some, body rubbing, warm up, you can even go back from that. The environment, a candle or a flower goes a long way. We work from the outside in so that by the time you get to breasts or vagina, there's been a lot of warm-up. So we really take that amount of time. The other reason we take that amount of time is the actual arousal tissue, the tissue that fills with blood, which is why a penis gets erect. So the tissue, men and women have the same amount of arousal tissue, but for men, it's mostly concentrated on the penis. So there's just one spot that you need to attend to arouse. With women, that same amount of tissue is much more distributed. It's distributed externally with the clitoris or the clitoris, and it's distributed inside the vagina. It's ludicrous. First they added to the clitoris the G spot. Then they added something called the A spot. Then they added something called the U spot. I mean, they might as well realize that there are lots of different spots inside the vagina that also have arousal tissue. So to get as much tissue aroused in a woman, a lot more areas have to be attended to, and that takes more time.
Wow.
When
Great
I learned this, it was like, huh?
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there any advice that you would have that's different for like people in long-term relationships versus newer relationships and younger versus older couples?
In some ways, the advice is really the same, you know, because as I said, each one has advantages and disadvantages. In some ways, older couples have disadvantages, partially because when we're growing up, things were much more repressed, but also we may have had over our lifespan a few more different partners, not necessarily, you know, and so we learned something from this partner, or maybe it's a second marriage, and the first marriage lasted 25 years, and over those years, let's say a man learned what worked for that woman, how she seemed to like her breasts touched, you know, how she liked, you know, whatever, how she liked it, what sexual position she liked, you know. There is an assumption that female bodies are the same and male bodies are the same, which is really not true. We have very different nervous systems, and so what might register in my nervous system as pleasure might register in another woman's nervous system as painful or nothing, you know. So an older, you know, relationship, they may try to transfer the knowledge they learned from someone else.
That doesn't work.
And it doesn't work,
Right.
you know. And it's so difficult in the sexual situation to tell your partner that what they're doing isn't working. It's so vulnerable. And I'm just kind of going where this goes, you know, and so one of the issues, one of the big things about sexuality is becoming, if you really get that there's no reason you should know, then to be able to give each other honest feedback in a tactful way, but to give each other honest feedback won't threaten the sexual ego so much.
Right.
And when I say in a tactful way, it's always valuable to point to what you do want, rather than saying how bad what you don't want is. So in other words, if I'm being touched too strongly, and it actually hurts a little bit, or it's annoying, or something like that, rather than saying, oh, that's too strong, pointing to what I don't like, if I say, oh, how about a little bit lighter, pointing to what I do want, that's tactful communication. An older couple may have is the natural sexual changes that happen with aging, which we are completely unprepared for in this culture. Very often for both men and women, libido or sexual desire decreases, interest in sexuality, kind of free-floating interest, oh, I'm horny today, you know, decreases. For women, as their estrogen goes down after menopause, their ability to lubricate decreases. For men, at some point they may or may not start having some difficulties getting an erection or difficulties maintaining an erection. So that's an extra challenge for older people that, again, it's so unfortunate that we're unprepared for. There are ways to deal with these things, but it's such an embarrassing situation. Unfortunately, this culture ties men's self-esteem partially to their erection. And so I know older couples where once or twice while in a lovemaking situation he was unable to either get or maintain an erection, it was so embarrassing to them that they retreated, not only from sexuality, but even from physical affection, because heaven forbid that should lead to sex, and then that should lead to that terribly embarrassing situation. So, in some ways, older couples are more challenged. But they also, on the other side, you know, hopefully they've developed the comfort with one another, if they're a long-term couple, and the maturity to be able to talk about this topic, you know, more easily.
Well, Shavana, it all makes a lot of sense to me in terms of why it is so hard to talk about, and the information you've provided makes it seem a lot simpler. So I really like in particular the idea of that, why should we all know, you know? And we do think we're supposed to know. So that is funny, once you get past that, it seems like that would just liberate you in so many ways. And also talking about sex, not during sex. You know, that's a real helpful piece of information. That's a lot of helpful information.
Great.
But I really appreciate your time, and
Great.
thank you.
You're very welcome.